To hear me. She's muted. Okay, looks like we're starting. Hi, everyone. I'm Jared. I'm one of the team members at Podcast Movement, and I'm so excited today to have my friend Tom Schwab. Tom, of course, is with Interview Valet, and today's topic is basically about getting guests or how to pick the best podcast to be a guest on, rather. And Tom has extensive experience in this, and Tom handles this topic, I think, the best out of a lot of the people that I've seen, in the sense that he's just got so much experience and so much consideration for podcasters, and it's just a nice balance there. And so I really appreciate Tom being willing to come and share these things that are very helpful and essential for podcasters if they want to be on other podcasts to grow their show. What Tom's going to talk about is going to be helpful to you. So this is relevant stuff. It's very timely. And so, Tom, thank you for being gracious enough to join us today. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, Jared, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled for Podcast Movement University. And then also to see you and everybody down in Tennessee in August is going to be great. I miss seeing everybody, and we're going to have a great event down there. So with that, I'm just going to jump right into here. All of these slides will be available. And I also want to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. All right. So the big thing, how do you pick podcasts? How do you pick the best shows to be a guest, right? There are over 2 million podcasts out there. When you don't have time to go on all of them. So we're going to show you a method to pick the best shows for you that will get you your goals. And then we're also going to go through a bunch of tools here that you can use. And so let me make this full screen here so that you can see all of those. So there we go. And if you want to see any of these slides, just go back to interviewvalet.com/PMU for Podcast Movement University, and a copy of all the slides will be there along with everything I talk about, all my social media, so you won't have to figure out which Tom Schwab in Kalamazoo, Michigan I am. So here's the point that I'm going to make here. Is my premise is that obscurity is your biggest problem, right? Right now, you could help hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people. They'd love to listen to your podcast. They'd love to buy your product, buy your service, whatever that is. They'd love to learn from you. They'd gladly give you money. There's only one problem. They don't know you exist. And I'd argue that so many people are telling us now, you need to break through the noise. I think most of us would agree. You're just adding to the noise. And some of the people that are telling us to break through the noise are the ones that are selling the megaphones. And what's happening is it's just getting noisier and noisier. My premise here is, instead of trying to break through the noise, why don't you get in on the conversation that people are already listening to? Now, if you're a podcaster, one of the things that you want to do is you want to grow your audience. And the first podcast movement I ever went to, I had to look up the date. It was back in 2015, Fort Worth, Texas. It was small. I mean, the entire conference was smaller than the Expo Center. I mean, heck, with as big as the conference is going to be this year at Opryland, it's probably going to be much, much bigger. But I remember Cliff Ravenscraft, and Cliff Ravenscraft at that time was known as the podcast answer man. I had to pull this old picture up. That doesn't even look like Cliff anymore. He's lost so much weight and is in such good shape. But somebody asked him, what's the best place to find podcast listeners? You know, should you go on Facebook? Should you go on Twitter? Should you go on YouTube? And I loved what he said. The best place to find podcast listeners is listening to podcasts, right? It's not a zero-sum game, right? If they listen to me on Cliff's podcast, doesn't mean they're going to stop listening to Cliff's. No, they'll get to understand me, come back to my podcast. So going on other people's podcasts, leveraging other people's audiences, other people's platforms is a great way to grow your audience. But it doesn't stop there. It's also a great way to grow your brand. This is Neil Patel. Neil's a podcaster, and he's also a world-renowned for search engine optimization, right? How to get found, how to rank higher in Google. And a couple of years ago, he mentioned us on one of his podcasts and as a great way to build links, right? Because every time you're on somebody else's show, they're going to promote you to their social media. They're going to give you a backlink to your site. And that's how people find you on the internet. We've got some clients that do this just for the SEO value. They'll do podcast guesting just for the SEO. And you could ask them, hey, would you rather be on, say, Tim Ferriss's podcast, get heard by 500,000 people? Or would you rather be on a undergraduate podcast at Harvard University that gets heard by 200 people? And I'll tell you what they're going to tell us. They're going to say, oh, give me the one that gives me the backlink from harvard.edu. So using other people's platforms, podcast guesting, great way to build your audience and a great way to build your brand. It's also a great way to grow your business. And you'll see this quote on websites all over. There's a lot of podcast guesting agencies that will throw this up. They'll say podcast interviews convert 25 times better than blogs. That is a true statement, but it's often misquoted. It was actually from a study that we did that was picked up in the HubSpot blog back in 2016. What it says is not that 25 times more people from listeners will, convert into customers or to leads. But it says that if somebody listens to you on a podcast and they come to your website, they will convert 25 times better than if they came from a blog. And you think about it, it makes sense, right? So if I'm reading a blog, I look at it, a good converting blog will convert viewer to lead at about 1% to 2%. But a podcast interview will convert to a lead 25 to 50% if they come to your website. And you think about it, it makes sense, right? If I've listened to you for 30 or 45 minutes, I know who you are. I know what you do. I know whether or not I want to work with you. So they're coming not as just cold traffic, they're coming as hot traffic. And with that, that's why you see the conversion rate so much better, but you'll also see the sales process so much quicker, right? They've already turned you up or turned you off on the podcast interview. So when they show up pre-qualified, ready to buy. And the studies have shown that those sales close quicker off of podcast interviews, and the average sale price is higher than cold traffic, right? They already know who you are. So I love this quote from Admiral Stockdale. Both Jared and I were in the Navy, and I loved Admiral Stockdale when he always say, who am I and why am I here? Well, I come with a unique experience. Back in 2016, I wrote a book called Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with the Targeted Interview Strategy. Christopher Lochhead called it the Bible of podcast guesting, right? Small B on the Bible there. I've been interviewed on 1,200 podcasts. A lot of people say, well, that's amazing. Well, in some ways, it's embarrassing, right? You should have a better system, but we did that while we were working out the system. I've also am the founder of Interview Valet. Back in 2015, we started to beta test a done-for-you system. We call it Podcast Interview Marketing. And I'm an engineer. I'm a geek, right? So I was a Navy nuke, and you'll see that I am obsessed with systems and processes. When I give you information here, it's not just based on my opinion or something that I found from the last 10 interviews. No, it's based on data. And I believe one of our core values is that our success is proportional to our systems. And I imagine the same things for you. If you can find a system to use podcast guesting, you'll get much better results with it. I'm also focused on relationships. You see, I believe that you aren't one funnel away. I believe that you're one conversation away. Relationships are the ultimate currency. And one of our core beliefs is in this digital age of automation, it's the personal touch that makes the difference. So with that, like I said, all of this recommendations here is not based on, hey, here's what I think. No, this is based on data. Over 7 years, over 700 clients, over 30,000 interviews, and over 50 million listeners. That's the system that we use and we teach. I openly teach it to everyone. And one of the key parts for this is that we've used it for small companies. We've used it for large companies, a lot of publicly traded companies. I'm always proud of Acuity Scheduling. We worked with them early on, and Gavin Zaglinski, great guest, and his company was the first one that was acquired by Squarespace. And he says a lot of that can come from podcast guesting. We also work with a lot of coaches, authors, nonfiction authors, and I'm very pleased that with this, that last year we had 4 books that were on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. So today, what we're going to go through, we're going to show you how you can build your brand to be recognized as the category king on your topic, category king or category queen. Show you how to educate and entertain the audience. Show you how that you can increase your listeners, your loyal subscribers, avid fans, and ultimately profitable customers. We'll show you how to grow your podcast, your brand, and your business. And this is something that I believe deeply, that we're blessed to be a blessing, right? You know something that could help other people, and you can do that as a host, as a guest, or as both. And I believe that the most valuable thing that you can ever give someone is a introduction to a new idea or a new person, right? It's the one thing that you can't buy for yourself, but it can change your world, right? I can think of the stuff that I learned 2015 at Podcast Movement. The people I met, they changed my world. And that's what you can do on podcast interviews. So let's jump into this. We're going to go through a couple things here. First, we're going to go through the algorithm. How do you pick podcasts over the 2 million that are out there? And then we're going to go through some tools that you can use to make it easier. So with that, I am going to move the StreamYard here to another screen, just in case there is anything that I need to see on that. I just thought of that. So we're going to go through the algorithm first that you can use to whittle down from 2 million podcasts to 200 podcasts that are perfect for you. Then we're going to go through a bunch of tools. Most of them are free tools. There's some upgraded things that you can use, but it's going to allow you to find the right ones, and a lot easier than going through all 2 million on Apple or iTunes. So the algorithm that we use looks at 4 things. The first one is the podcast itself. Does it have your ideal audience? If they're not your ideal audience, if they're nice people, but not nice customers or nice listeners, it's like talking to the wrong audience. If you just want to talk to people, go on a street corner, but it's not going to help. You want to make sure that it's very targeted, that you're talking to the right people. So that's the first thing to look at. Then we're going to look at the website. Does this website help your online visibility? The third thing we'll look at is reach. How many people are actually going to hear this podcast interview? Both from downloads, from social media, and from email. And then the last one is brand affinity. And this is important. You're judged by the company you keep. So with that, you want to make sure that you're on a podcast that you're proud to be associated with. So let's walk through these one by one. Okay. First, the podcast. Does it have your ideal audience? One of the things that you'll see is often the audience is like the host or aspires to be like the host. So if you want to get on a podcast that's talking to younger people, maybe Generation Z, you're probably not going to want to have a host that has as much gray hair as me, right? And vice versa. I can think of one time a client came to us and he said, I want to talk to C-level executives, right, at Fortune 500 companies. I'm like, perfect. We can target that. And then he came back and he said, and I want to be on Entrepreneur on Fire. And I'm like, John has got an amazing podcast, right? But I don't think that C-level executives of Fortune 100 companies or Fortune 500 companies are listening to Entrepreneur on Fire. Do you? And he's like, no, I never thought about that. So make sure that it's got your audience there. Another thing, there's an ugly fact, right? That most podcast interviews that die within the first 10 episodes. So if somebody, is got a new podcast, make sure they're going to be around for the long term. It does you no good if you're interview number 8 and they stop paying the Libsyn bill at interview number 9, right? You'll never get it found, or if they're not promoting it. So often, if people come to us or our clients and say, "Oh, we're launching a podcast. We'd love to have you as a guest." Well, sometimes they'll say, "Could you come back in a quarter?" And see where things are. One thing that people will look at a lot is say, well, how many ratings and reviews do they have? There's a study out of Canada, and for the life of me, I can't think of the gentleman's name right now. I'll find it and I'll put it up in the show, in the notes that go along with this. But he did a study last year where he looked at all of the ratings and reviews and tried to correlate those to podcasts and to see, if the bigger podcasts had more ratings and reviews, or if the audience was more engaged. And I think what it was, well, first of all, he said there was no correlation to it. And the thing is that podcasts that came out 6 years ago, when most podcasts were listened to on iTunes, had more ratings and reviews. Now, since things are so fragmented, if somebody's listening to you on Overcast, that's what I listen to, and you tell me, hey, go to iTunes and leave a rating and review, probably not going to do that. I'm not going to switch podcasts. Or the other thing too is that, if somebody is new to podcasts or understands the power of a review, they might leave you one. But if somebody's been listening for years and years, they probably aren't as apt to jump on and just leave a rating and review. So don't think that, hey, a podcast has to have X number of reviews in order to be worthwhile. It's not an indicator, at least not in 2021. So we talked about the podcast. The next thing was the website. We always look at the show notes. And does the podcast have show notes that's going to build our online visibility? If it's just put out there like a radio show, it's going to be hard to find and you don't get any of the SEO value on it. So look at the quality of the show notes. Are they giving backlinks to the guest's website? And then one of the things to look at, or two things, it's a little techie here, but the value of a backlink is affected by two major things. One is the authority of the website. It's called a Moz score. So the older a website is, the more content they have in there, the better. So if a brand new website comes in, its authority is probably pretty low. If you get a website that is got lots of content, has been out there for years, it's going to have a lot more authority. The other thing too is if it's a website that ends in .edu, an educational website, or one that ends in .gov, that's much, much more valuable. So you think about it. I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I was talking to the dean of the business school, and they were looking to do a podcast. And he's like, well, but who would want to be on ours? And I'm like, I could probably get you some big CEOs from publicly traded companies, people like HubSpot. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yes, that backlink is gold to them. They would pay large sums or have their host or their executives show up on a podcast just to get that. So that's the authority. The other one is the popularity, right? Typically, it's called an Alexa score. The lower the number, the more popular the website. I think the last time I ran it, ours is probably in the top 300,000 websites. You look at something that's like Wikipedia is probably in the top 10. So a link from Wikipedia, yes, is a lot more valuable than a link from Interview Valet. So we looked at the podcast. We looked at the website. The next one is the reach. And, how many people will hear this podcast interview? And there's a couple ways to do this. I mean, hearing it is not just downloads, right? And there are some great tools out there now where you can get estimated downloads. There's some that are grossly inflated, and then there's some other ones that are more reasonable. So you can look at what their estimated downloads are. Also look at their social media. Are they promoting these interviews? Are you going to be seen? And is it going to be by the right people? Right. So if somebody has 1 million TikTok followers, well, God love them. That's great. But my audience isn't by and large on TikTok. So I would look at, say, which ones are most applicable to me, which ones are most applicable to you. And then finally, email list. Are they promoting this to their email? I think of Stephen Wassner from Onward Nation up in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Every week he's out there promoting his guests on his email, and he's got a huge email list. Even if someone doesn't listen to podcasts, that's not how they get their medium. They're still going to see about that guest on the email. So look at the reach. Are they reaching your people? And then finally, brand affinity. I don't know if you've noticed this, but sometimes when you Google someone's name, the last podcast they were on comes up. So it's not the most popular podcast. It's not the highest ranking one. It's the last one. And so I always talk to people about this. Is it consistent with your brand? So from that standpoint, I'm old enough to remember Wayne's World. Remember 2 guys in their mom's basement doing television. Well, think of the podcast interview. Would you be pleased to be there? Would you be proud to be there? So if you're selling B2B consulting, right? If somebody saw you on this Wayne's World podcast, would that help them move to listening to your podcast? Would it help them to sign that, 5-figure deal? Or would they look at it and go, no, this person isn't for me? You can think of this from faith issues too, right? Is this consistent with it? We even had a client worked with us recently, and he's a CEO of a company that is going public. And we were explaining this to them. And, one of their people mentioned about something like the Joe Rogan podcast would be great. And I'm like, be careful what podcast you go on, right? No judgments. What they did was legal in that state. But, Elon Musk, CEO of a publicly traded company, was on a podcast when Rogan passed him a joint, right? And I just asked their CEO, would you be comfortable? Would your board, would your brand be comfortable with that if that happened? And he's like, nope. And I'm like, then be careful what shows you go on. So we looked at those 4 things, right? The podcast, the website, the reach, and the brand affinity. So what does this look like when you find the right podcast? When you get on there, what is the results going to look like? Well, first of all, like Cliff Ravenscraft said, the best place to find podcast listeners is listening to podcasts. So you're going to get more subscribers, more downloads, and you'll see that in your numbers. You'll also see more market or brand recognition, right? More times that you're put up there on social media, you're tagged. One of the things you'll see also is higher quality leads. So when people come to you, they're pre-qualified, and that makes for a shorter sales cycle. And the other thing that we've seen is that there's not that transactional trial, right? If they're going to come with you and engage with you, it's based on a relationship that you have with them, not just a transaction of, well, I'll give it a try. And the other thing that we've seen is that, today it's never been easier to sell something on the internet, right? Just be a penny cheaper than the next person and you'll be able to sell it. But don't think that is the same thing as growing a business. Growing a business is based off the lifetime value of a customer. And so with that, that's got to be based on know, like, and trust and a relationship. And exposure brings opportunity. So let's go through and say, okay, well, I understand the algorithm, and we'll have time at the end here to go through questions. But what tools can I use to whittle down from 2 million down to, say, 200? And we're going to go through three main things. First one is searchable databases. And the next one's online directories and some helpful publications. So there's lots of databases out there. And the great news is they're getting better and better. The data used to be the Achilles heel of podcasting. I'm amazed how good it's gotten, how quickly, and how better it's going to get going forward here. So I just want to go through some of these. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them you haven't. All of them are important. So the first one is called Listen Notes. There's a free version of it. This is a great tool for finding podcasts or finding guests. So if you wanted to say, hey, I want to go on the same podcast that Tom Schwab has gone on, well, you can go in there, put my name, and you can see where I've been the host, where I've been the guest. One thing I would say about this one, be very, very careful. The downloads are greatly exaggerated, but it's got some powerful filters. And one of the ones that I like is that you can filter, out the dead shows, those podcasts that haven't published in the last, 30 or 45 days. And you can really, see which ones are most meaningful for you today. I think we've all had that experience where we do some research and then go and say, this show is great. Well, that show ended pre-COVID. No sense in trying to be on it. So when you go into here, this is what it looks like. There's a free version. There's a paid version. So here's what I did. I just put Jared's name in there, and you can see where he has been, either by the most current podcasts, the most relevant podcasts, and it'll give you all of these lists. You can listen to them right there. You can click on them, and you can even, if you see on the right-hand side there, you can start to filter it out and just say, just show me the podcasts in the last year, and don't show me the ones that are outside the United States. Only the one in English. Maybe just show me where Jared's name is put in the description. And I want to make sure that I've got a long podcast, one where I can really see where he's talked for a little bit, where it wasn't just a quick mention. So maybe, where it's at least 30 minutes to a couple of hours. So you can play around with all of these filters and get the kind of results that you want with this. And once you get the paid version, you can save lists, you can get all kinds of notifications. And even sometimes if you know exactly what you're going to do, sign up for it for a month, or sign up for the free, 7 days that they give you, and find the information that you need. The next one is Podchaser. And I just saw in Podmob this morning that they just started to partner with somebody else. Amazing. This, if you've ever gone to IMDb for movies, you're watching a movie and you're like, who is that person in there? And you put in the movie name and IMDb, and it tells you everybody. It'll tell you the producer, the the director. That's what they're trying to do in Podchaser. And if you haven't gone to here yet, I'd highly recommend just check out Podchaser. You can sign up as a host or a guest and sort of claim your spot there. The next one is called Raphonic, and this is out of the UK. This is one of my favorite databases right now. And I think part of it is because there's so many different ways that you can filter things. So you can filter by the guest format, right? Do they have guests or don't they? Have they been active in the last 45 days? How many episodes? How many social media followers? What's the estimated downloads? Location. They can even break it down by the expected gender of the audience. And I remember talking to their founder and said, well, how do you do that? I was amazed. He said, you look at the reviews and you figure out if they came from a male or female. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. This one, it's really hard if you're saying, hey, I want to see all the podcast interviews that Jared's been a guest on. Won't do it for you. So sometimes you have to have, 2 or 3 databases and play around with all of them. This is an example here. So say I want to go on a podcast that talks about inbound marketing. So I just put that in the title or the topics of Raphonic. And you can see that it's given me hundreds of different options. In fact, they're telling me that they've got a total reach of about 136,000 listeners that they can get to. And you can see here, they're going to give you download numbers. They're going to give you how many social media, what language they're in, that sort of thing. Well, I don't have time to go through all of these and don't have time to be on guests on all of those. So you come in here and you start changing it and you say, okay, well, sort by the ones that have the most listeners. And, the categories I chose were business, all the different ones in there. Show me the ones that are just in the United States, languages are English. Just show me the ones that are, that are currently active. Formats I picked that have interviews and maybe have more than 10 episodes. So all of a sudden you see it went from a reach of 136,000 down to 21,000. So with that, this is a much, much easier list to go off of and to reach out to. And even with their the paid version, they'll tell you the email addresses for the producer or the host. Very, very powerful tool here. The other thing I love about Raphonic is it's the best one that I have seen for estimated download numbers. And go to it and check it out for your own podcast. Drop me a message to tell me if you see that it's realistic too. So here's one of my favorite podcasts, Christopher Lochhead, Follow Your Different. You go into listen notes and it's going to tell you that he is in the top 0.5%. He's got a great podcast, but even he'll tell you, no, he's not. If you go to Raphonic, it's going to tell you that he gets somewhere between, 3,000 and 5,000 listeners per episode. And so that puts it in the top 5%. And that's typically what we see. It's off at least by a factor of 10 here. If you go into listen notes, you'll find it seems like everybody is in the top 5% of podcasts. This is a new one. There's Podcast Talk. Talked with the founder of it. One of the things I like about this is all the data is manually verified. It's a new platform. Right now, what they have is about the same, maybe a little bit less than the other platforms, but some of the things they have planned for the next 2 quarters will be amazing. They'll be able to pull in things like we talked about the website, the authority, the rankings, all of those things. So keep your eye on this one. Here's one that I'm really interested in, and this is almost spooky. If you haven't checked out SparkToro, definitely look at this. This looks at audiences, not podcasts. So it's run by a guy by the name of Rand Fishkin. Used to run SEO Moz. The Moz score, that was his. So you go to SparkToro and you can look and say, okay, I want to find audiences that talk about whatever. So maybe about podcasting. Or I want to find audiences that have these words in their profile. Maybe it's marketing, you know, maybe people that follow a social media account. So you could say, yeah, my people are like the same as Tony Robbins people. So you could put people that follow Tony Robbins in there, or, people that typically go to this website, or people that use this hashtag. And you can find, this is spooky, you can find all of the people that follow Tony Robbins on Twitter, and you can find out what podcasts they listen to or subscribe to. So here's an example. Stacking Benjamins. Love this podcast. Joe Saul Seahigh got a great podcast there. And you could say, yeah, I want to find podcasts that are like, that have the same audience as Stacking Benjamins. Well, up till now, you couldn't find that. But if you go into SparkToro, just put the website, stackingbenjamins.com, hit that, and it's going to tell you what websites they go to, what social media they follow, and what's most important for us is what podcasts those people listen to. So of all the people that routinely go to Stacking Benjamins, these are the shows they go to. So if all of a sudden you were thinking, my audience would listen to Stacking Benjamins. Well, instead of just saying, I've got to get on Stacking Benjamins, you can go into SparkToro and find probably 50 different podcasts that they listen to. And one of the things I love about Rand is I think the first 10 searches each month are free. So great platform. We as a company spend way too much money on databases, but we need to do this. So we subscribe fully to all of these. Okay, so we went through first the databases. Now we've got online directories. And honestly, there are dozens and dozens of these, sort of like the Craigslist, right? Connecting people, connecting guests, connecting hosts, various levels of it. Here's the three of my favorite. I think they're really trying to help the industry. Andrew Ullman does podcastguest.com, sort of an email-based one. You can register as a guest. You can register as a host. Great place to start out. And people can search that database there. Or if you're in a weird niche, sometimes you can go there. Awesomeguest.com. Great platform. And that's one to definitely check out. And then recently, Podmatch has come out. Podmatch is really interesting. They're starting to use AI to match guests and hosts. That's a promising thing there. So just look at some of these. Like I said, there are dozens out there. Some of them have just buyer beware. It's like dating on Craigslist. You could find somebody great, but you're going to probably kiss a lot of frogs in the meantime. So we went through the databases. We went through the directories. The next thing I wanted to go through is some helpful publications, right? There's a lot of done-for-you agencies out there. I'm not here to promote any of those. Doug Morneau, a great podcaster out of Canada, did a free download last year. You don't even have to put your email address in there. If you just type Doug Morneau podcast guesting guide, he's got all of that, and he'll go through all the different agencies, the pluses, the minus. Great resource that he did for the community. The other thing too is I mentioned, I wrote a book. I give away a lot more of these books than I ever sell because I really want people to use this to understand the power that podcast guesting could do. Everything in this book, we openly teach. This is what we do at Interview Valet. We just do it with excellence. We've got 27 people on the team. We're all remote. We've got people in Europe, Canada, United States, and now in Mexico as we launch the Interview Valet Espanol division. But you can get all of these things free. Just go back to interviewvalet.com/PMU. The slides will be there and all of the things will be there. Before we go to questions, I just wanted to share one thing with you. I believe we're all blessed to be a blessing. you learned things not just for yourself, but so that you could help other people with it. And what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And now it's never been easier to share that with the world as a host, as a guest, right? I used to be able to say, well, I live in Southwest Michigan. God, how could I ever share this with anybody? Well, now it doesn't matter where you are. And really at Interview Valet, our mission is to personally introduce inspiring thought leaders to millions of people they could serve for the betterment of all. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I don't know if Jared wants to jump in here or not, but we can take some questions now too.
Well, I know we have one question, and it's from Jerry from Beyond the Rut. He says on the Moz score, what is the spam score? Is 1% good?
I believe the lower spam score, the better. If a website gets tied to a website, that website, it's really, really hard to catch, to clean that up. So yeah, if you've got a website that has a high spam score, stay away from that. And I love Jerry. There's a great picture of Jerry and I in Orlando at Podcast Movement. What would that be? 2019. I always say the hardest question I've ever been asked on a podcast interview is, what is your favorite Renee Zellweger movie? And Jerry asked that to every one of his guests. And Jared, in the Navy, I had a boss, Lieutenant Commander Duncan, and he would always say, only kids and clowns like surprises. Which one do you take me for? And so all of our guests, we give them a brief sheet on all the podcasts. And I can remember preparing for Jerry's and seeing that question and going, huh? I know the name, but I Googled it real quick so I could say, oh, Jerry Maguire, right? Of course. So that I came up to his podcast prepared.
That question is awesome. I love that, Jerry, and that is very Jerry. Not to get on a Jerry bandwagon here, but he and I have a couple of inside jokes. One of them is we are fans of Nutella, right or wrong. And so he and at that same Podcast Movement, he brought me like this big jar of Nutella, and because we've often joked about it online. And yeah, Jerry's a funny guy.
It's important. It's important to show up as a podcast guest prepared, right? You better know the inside jokes, because if he would have asked me that question, I guess it might have been weird if, a 55-year-old guy knows that answer off the top of his head. But if I would have gone, or when, John Lee Dumas used to ask everybody on EO Fire, if you woke up in a parallel universe with $2,000, what's the first thing you would do? And you'd hear people go, huh, I've never thought of that. All they're yelling to the audience is, I'm not one of you. I've never listened to this show.
Oh my goodness. That's great. Let's see. It's funny. Jerry put something about Nutella in the chat. So yeah, there you go. That guy's crazy in a good way. So we got Jonathan Jones. He's saying, great share, Tom. And of course, you're getting some love from Fred Castaneda and several others. RC says great content. So, everybody's grateful for you, Tom, as they should be. So, Tom, because we don't have any other questions right now, let's just kind of, before we wrap this up, we've mentioned a couple of places where people can connect. Let's just kind of go over that again. If people want to learn more or they want to check out the book or whatever, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah. So just go to interviewvalet with a V.com /PMU. And we'll have all of the slides there. The free copy of my book. There's a podcast interview marketing assessment. And if any of this resonated with you and you're like, man, I'd like to see, how we could work together, we'll put a link to my calendar in there. And everything we do for the host is free. So if you're looking for great guests, we focus on 3 verticals: business, faith in Christianity, and health, nutrition, and wellness. So if you've got a great sci-fi podcast or a comedy podcast, definitely let me know about it. But that's not verticals that we focus on, so probably can't get you guests for it.
And in closing, do you have any other fun stories of where you were a guest and you had something unique happen that maybe you weren't expecting, or something that might be fun to share?
Oh,
I'm sure you've got one or two stories.
Well, I've not only got stories, I'll put this up there too. This is the checklist we give all of our clients. Remember, Jared, checklists are written in blood. I don't know if you remember that from the military. Make sure it's someone else's blood, right? Little things we all know, turn your phone off. But did you ever think about turning your Dropbox sync off? So I was working on a podcast interview. Everything's going well, right? And all of a sudden it was Skype. This was years and years ago. The download speeds probably weren't as good. And all of a sudden the internet connection started to go bad. And someone had sent me a video that I'd asked for. And I'm like, oh no, so now I know. I always pause my Dropbox. Here's another great one.
That's a good one. Yep.
Here's a vanity one. And this is going way back. Do you remember Darren Bentley on Big Wig Nation?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm friends with Darren. Yeah.
Darren is awesome. And if you don't know him, you can pick him out at any podcast movement. He's got to be at least like 6'7". You can pick him out in the crowd. So he had this podcast called Big Wig Nation back years ago. I had just got this microphone. We were working on, he was doing the interview on Skype. I had just rebooted my computer, right? I wanted everything fresh. We get finished up with the podcast interview and Darren says, hey, what kind of microphone are you using? And man, it was an audio only interview on Skype. I was so proud. I just said, I'm using a Heil PR40 microphone, right? And he goes, doesn't sound like that. So with that, I went into Skype, looked, and when I rebooted my computer, Skype is famous for this. It will pick the wrong microphone. And so here I am talking into a $400 microphone being picked up by the internal one. Nothing ruins your credibility more than making it sound like you called in from the bathroom or from prison, right? Maybe people just stuck around to the end so they could hear the flush or something like that. But I was so mortified by that. So it's like one of the things now that I'll often do is, just scratch my microphone or something at the beginning and ask the host, hey, can you hear that? And if they say yes, that's the ultimate mic check.
That's a great tip. I have actually made that mistake. I ended up posting the episode anyway, but when I go back and attempt to listen to it, I can't even make it through because it's just not good enough, and I should probably take it down. We do have one question that just popped up, so we'll run this by you real quick. It says, this is from Diane Romel Fay. Do you have a suggestion on how to ask or submit yourself as a guest to one of those podcasts that you found?
Diane, thank you so much for not using the P word, right? Pitch. Yes. We're going to be giving these out at Podcast Movement.
Yep.
You pitch a baseball, you introduce a human being. I love how you ask, how do you ask or submit yourself? All right. You're all podcast hosts, right? I know right now there's 3 types of people you want to have on your podcast: your friends of friends, and people you want to be your friends. Nowhere on there does it say slimy robo pitches. I'm pitched probably 3 times to be on my podcast every day. They all love the show. They want to be a guest. The only problem is I don't have a podcast, but I'm on somebody's list. So Diana, a great thing that you can do is think about it and say, first of all, if I'm a friend of them, it's easy, right? Well, friend of friend. Go into LinkedIn, see if you have any common connections, right? If Jared knows them, maybe you reach out and say, Jared, do you think I'd be a good guest on this? Would you mind doing an introduction? Or when I'm at Podcast Movement, could you introduce us? Something like that. Or somebody else in the community that is connected to them. So, that's a friend of a friend, or people they would want to be your friend. How do you make friends? Well, listen to their episode, leave a rating and review, right? We are all vain. We all listen to our name, right? And if you leave a rating and review, the podcast host will know. Leave some comments on their social media, share it. Gary Vaynerchuk always talks about jab, 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 right hook. I believe if you serve, you'll get asked to be on podcasts. So, you share the content, you leave a rating and review. Then you reach out to them and say, Jared, I've been listening to your podcast. I love it. I really enjoyed this episode. I think I have something that could be of value to your audience, right? I've got this, I've got that, would that make sense to add value to your audience? If you keep serving like that, they will ask you to be on the show. Right. Because you can pick out the robo pitch. Jared, I hope this day finds you well. I love your show and would love to be a guest. My book is on, whatever, something like that. And it's like, these people have not even listened to my show. Right. Starving the Doubts. Mine is on keto. No, it's not. This is not a diet podcast, but on those. And the funny part is, all right, we're pulling right behind the curtain here. Podcasters know those things, right? And I get forwarded pitches all the time. It's like, can you believe this one? And so the problem is not only do you not get invited, but, people can start to share those around. So, Diane, be yourself, go out there, serve, bigger is not better. Better is better. Don't try robo pitching 1,000 podcasts, because if you do, I guarantee you will get, 5% that will say, yes, I'd love to have you as a guest. Those aren't the 5% of podcasts you want to be on. More is not better. Better is better. Focus on that.
Yeah, that's good advice. I've gotten emails that said "dear first name," like they got that part wrong. So that's all you can do is laugh and just be like, that's nice try.
Okay, and I'm going to throw myself under the bus. The last email that I sent to you, I misspelled your name because I had it in the computer wrong or saved there. And Dan was kind enough to say, Tom, you misspelled the name. I got it. I'll forward it on to Jared. And I'm like, oh,
that's not the first time he's had to do that. So yeah, Dan's generous that way, but yeah, we really appreciate this, Tom. And thank you so much. I hope people will go to interviewvalet.com/PMU, hook up the freebies and the various things. Is that checklist also on there, Tom?
It will be in about 5 minutes.
Fair enough. Okay, because I know Diane was interested in getting the checklist, and Diane also wanted to know if she could potentially connect with you on LinkedIn.
Please. I was going to say, I'm the only Tom Schwab in all of Kalamazoo. So feel free to connect with me there. I always say that's where I do my professional stuff. If you connect with me on Facebook, that's great too. But you're likely to see pictures of my grandkids and the 2 miniature donkeys. We live on 6.5 acres in Southwest Michigan. That proves you can do podcast interviews from anywhere.
Excellent. Well, Tom, thank you again, and look forward to the possibility of seeing you in August. So it looks like that's going to work out, and I'm excited about it. Thank you again.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, Tom.